Welcome to 20 Summers, a brand new arts festival in Provincetown, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. We're here in the historic Hawthorne Barn, and today we're hosting a Day of Words. I'm Julia Glass. I am the literary director of 20 Summers and one of the co-founders. And one of my greatest pleasures in the position and power I hold is in being able to invite as guests some of my very favorite writers. And Valerie Martin, who is our guest of the hour, is in fact one of my absolute favorite contemporary novelists. I had never met her before, and I had the chutzpah to approach her to come to this brand new festival that nobody ever heard of, and here she is helping make this festival launch a huge success. I'd also like to thank Comcast for recording all of our events during these literary conversations and readings so that many others can share them beyond. And also thanks to the town of Provincetown, which has been hugely supportive in all our efforts to keep this beautiful historic barn open to the public for at least 1 month of the year. So, Valerie Martin is the author of 10 novels, including Trespass, Mary Riley, Italian Fever, and Property, 3 collections of short fiction, and a biography of St. Francis of Assisi titled Salvation. She has been awarded grants from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation, as well as the Kafka Prize for Mary Riley and Britain's Orange Prize for Property. Among others, Martin's last novel, The Confessions of Edward Day, was a New York Times notable book for 2009. Her latest books are a novel, The Ghost of the Mary Celeste, about which she's going to be talking, and a middle grade reader, Anton and Cecil, Cats at Sea, co-written with her niece, Lisa Martin. Valerie Martin has taught in many writing programs. She resides in Dutchess County, New York, and currently teaches at Mount Holyoke College. Please welcome Valerie.
Thank you. I really want to thank Julie for inviting me to this wonderful place. It's a perfect place to talk about this book because we are surrounded by water, I've noticed since my arrival here. And I've been listening to the different writers talk yesterday and today, and I was thinking as I was walking up the little road here that writers have such good intentions. They're always trying to change the world a little and do good things, such as take a building and try to give some life back to it. It's a small thing in some ways, but it's a big thing. So, and I think writers kind of get used to being surrounded by other writers, and they get the feeling that everyone has good intentions. But as we know, that's not the case. So I'm going to talk about this book. This book, The Ghost of the Mary Celeste, has in its title the name of a ship, the Mary Celeste, and some people have heard of it, some have not. But it's a famous mystery of the sea. In 1872, off the coast of the Azores, a ship that had left New York 3 weeks earlier was found adrift. The ship was in good condition. It had lots of food on it. The sails were in a little bit of disrepair, but there was no one on it. And there had been a crew of 10. There had been 10 people on it. They had evidently left the ship in a hurry, but no one has ever been able to figure out why they left. There was no reason for them to leave. There have been various theories about it over the years, including things like giant squid and alien abduction is one. Others have to do with the cargo exploding, but it's never really been adequately solved. And it was a mystery that I read about when I was in 5th grade in my weekly reader. Just a little account of this strange thing, a derelict ship with no one on it. And I went home and spoke to my father, who happened to be home, and he's a sea captain. He was a captain of giant ships, not sailing ships, but big block-long steaming ships. And he had heard about it, and he was interested in my remarks about it, which was unusual. It was first unusual that he was home, and second unusual that I said anything that interested him. So, so it stuck in my mind for many years. And just a few years ago, I'm not sure where I read this, but I learned that the captain's wife and 2-year-old daughter were aboard the ship. And that struck me as surprising. I didn't realize that women went to sea that much. I thought they were bad luck. But my early researches revealed that, in fact, women were on sailing ships quite a bit, especially on whalers, which would go out sometimes 2 or 3 years at a time. Children were born on whalers and learned to walk on a ship before they hit the ground, which I thought must have been an amazing experience that they would never remember. But that happened. It was not uncommon. Sometimes whaling captains were, in fact, so poor they had no real homes, and so their families were always with them. Ships that had women on them were called hen frigates by those who didn't have, by those captains who didn't have their women aboard. And so then I began to look into this particular ship, this famous ship, the Mary Celeste, which sailed from New York, and I discovered that the captain was named Benjamin Briggs, and he was from Marion, Massachusetts, which is right down the road here in Buzzards Bay. The Briggs family were all sailors, and somewhat a doomed family. Nathan Briggs, Benjamin's father, had 6 children. 5 of them died at sea, which is really, it sounds as if it was very unusual. Unfortunately, it's revealed that it actually wasn't that uncommon. What was a little strange was that his daughter, his only daughter, died at sea. She had gone with her young husband, Captain Gibbs. It's a little bit of a problem here. The Briggses, the Gibbses, the Cobbs, everybody's names are very similar. But Maria had gone with her young husband on a trip. They were off the coast of Cape Fear, and they had just been married. I guess they'd been married about 2 years. They left a 1-year-old child at home. And they were hit by a steamer, and both the captain and his wife went overboard and drowned. And their little son was left behind with the Briggs family. Then Benjamin disappeared from the Mary Celeste. His brother Oliver, in the same time almost, they both left New York about a week apart. They had planned to meet in Messina and had figured out where they were going to have drinks, and the two brother captains, where they were going to meet, where they were going to sing and have meals, not drinks because they were teetotal. And he got in a storm in the Bay of Biscay, Oliver, and drowned, and Benjamin disappeared from the Mary Celeste, so that was 2 more gone. And then another died of yellow fever and was buried in the Gulf of Mexico, not buried, but dropped into the sea. I began to get a picture of bodies dropping into the sea, people's children just disappearing. I've never liked water, and I don't swim. And as I worked on this book, I began to understand why I had this terror of water. Also, I'm from New Orleans, so I have a very righteous terror of water. So anyway, I began to do the research, and it quickly led me to a name that I didn't expect to find, which was Arthur Conan Doyle. Arthur Conan Doyle was a young doctor. He just graduated he was an eye doctor, from medical school. He sent his mother a little note when he graduated from medical school with a little sketch of himself wielding a couple of knives, and it said, "Licensed to kill." So his early identification with crime was thereby revealed. But about 12 years after the incident, after the Mary Celeste was found, sailed to Gibraltar by the salvaging crew, where it was impounded in an admiralty trial that lasted for 3 months, because the proctor there was convinced that the salvaging crew had actually murdered the Briggs family and the other sailors on the ship. There was no evidence for that. In fact, it's almost just patently impossible. So it was a famous trial, and Arthur Conan Doyle had read about it when he was in school. So he was in South Sea, wanting to be a doctor, but he didn't have any patience. And so he would write stories, hoping that he might be able to make a little money on the side with his stories. He'd always liked to tell stories. And he decided to solve the mystery of the Mary Celeste. So he wrote a story, one of his earliest stories. It's called J. Habakkuk Jepson's Statement, which is a really awkward title. If you Google it, you can read it. And it was published in Cornhill magazine without attribution. because that was their habit. They didn't say who wrote their stories. Of course, since it had the title J. Habakkuk Jepson's Statement, and the Cornhill published both fiction and nonfiction, many people took it to be a true story and a true account of what had actually happened on the Mary Celeste. It's a colonialist fantasy of the most horrific order. Conan Doyle imagines that at the very last minute, they took on a black passenger who was an ex-slave and hated white people and was determined to kill them all. So first he throws the baby overboard. He's also kind of elegant and interesting because this is Conan Doyle. He was incapable of creating a character without touching him in with something that makes him sort of fascinating, even though evil. First he throws the baby over, then the wife goes after the baby, and then the husband shoots himself. That's 3 down. Right? And then gradually he manages to get rid of all the other passengers except for a few sailors who are faithful to him, and they sail the ship to Africa, where he is going to become a king of a tribe. It's really an outrageous story. It just opens your eyes so wide when you're reading it. At the same time, it's a very engaging story, and the plot, though really in some ways ludicrous, pulls you through. So I was fascinated by this story, and especially by the fact that many people thought it was true. It was reviewed in a few places as a true account, and at last the mystery is solved. Others immediately knew that it was a fantasy. I can't imagine how anyone could not have known that. So that got me interested in Arthur Conan Doyle and his connection to the ship. Some of the things he said about the Mary Celeste, which were totally fabricated, such as that the teapot was still hot, that there was a cat on board. I mean, the teapot would be hot. It'd been adrift for 2 weeks. It makes no sense. Stuck to the story. Other things about it, that it was actually towed into Gibraltar, when in fact it was sailed into Gibraltar. Little errors began to stick to the story. And as a novelist, I couldn't help but be attracted to that. That here's a true event that starts to almost immediately accrue lots of things that don't make sense or simply are patently absurd. So I thought it started to look into Arthur Conan Doyle's early days and thinking about why he might have been drawn to this story and why he might have fabricated this crazy fantasy, which actually it was the first story that he made any money off of. It paid his rent for a year. It brought him to the attention of a couple of other magazines and periodicals, so that he was able to sell future stories. I think probably within a year and a half, he had written his first Sherlock Holmes story. So this was one of the stories that set him free, the Mary Celeste. He was made to feel a little bad about it because the family was upset by the story, the Briggs family. He didn't use the name Briggs, he called the captain Tibbs. So in this scene in my novel, this takes place on a ship bound for Africa, the Mayumba, and this is pretty much a true incident. It's fabricated, of course, to some extent. But Arthur Conan Doyle's first job, his real job, was as a surgeon on board a whaler. And he went to the Arctic, and he loved that. He was a great big Scot, and he was always hot. So he loved being cold, and he loved all the whiteness up there, and he loved clubbing seals, and he went out on the boats. He went out in the boats, he didn't have to up against the whales and, help to bring down giant creatures. Felt a little mild guilt about it, but then he would think about how important it was to have light and how ladies looked in a sealskin coat, and it seemed to him it was a good thing to be doing. So he had a great time. He loved that. But his next post was as a medical doctor. He was a surgeon on the whaler ship. His next post was on the Mayumba as the ship's doctor. And the Mayumba was just a cargo passenger ship. It wasn't up to anything exciting as far as he was concerned. And he didn't like anything about it. He didn't like Africa. He couldn't take the heat. He got malaria and nearly died. And after he came back from that trip, he was quite disillusioned. So this is a little scene with Arthur Conan Doyle. And it's called A Conversation with the Captain. It takes place when they left Britain. They almost immediately ran into a terrible storm, and they finally came out of it. And all the passengers had been sick, except Doyle. He didn't get seasick, which was a good thing for the doctor. And so this takes place after they've come out of the storm and things are calming down a bit on the ship. This little section has an epigraph from Joseph Conrad, who writes so wonderfully about the sea. And it is, "One ship, which I call to mind now, had the reputation of killing somebody every voyage she made." And here's the chapter. Like mushrooms after a rain, the passengers commenced popping up everywhere. They paraded on the saloon deck, converged in the saloon, and in their dining room. Passing one another on their shipboard excursions, they chattered volubly in the passageway. In the afternoon, cards were broken out, and the doctor joined his charges for a game of whist. All the hatches were open, the air was fresh, and one could sit at the table with a glass of wine or brandy with no need to hold tightly to the stem. The day passed pleasantly, and in the evening, Dr. Doyle took his dinner with the officers. Over brandy, Captain Wallace entertained him with stories of the sights afforded the tourist of the dark continent. He told of native tribes who offered human sacrifice to alligators, which devilish creatures swarmed the shore when they knew their tribute was due. One could hear, he said chillingly, the screams of the victims for miles down the river. On another occasion, the captain had seen a human skull protruding from a giant anthill, a fate, he learned, reserved by one tribe for its enemies in another. White men couldn't survive long in Africa, he opined. Its malignancy infected their souls, no matter how much liquor they took, and they took a lot. Doyle, startled by these horrors, spoke of the more wholesome oddities of the Arctic, of a captain who, seeing it was light for 24 hours a day, decided to change day for night, and of the massive white bears stretched out full length on their stomachs, wrapping their great paws around an ice hole, waiting patiently for a seal to come up for a breath of air, and when it did, whack, lunch was served. Clever creatures, chuckled Wallace, amused by this image. At length, the two men, in companionable spirits, agreed to take a turn on the quarterdeck, where passengers were strictly forbidden to roam. Wallace swept a sharp eye over his vessel to the bow, the waist, the strolling passengers on the saloon deck, and at last to the horizon, which was shrouded in a damp mist. The fresh air of the morning had given way to an oppressive humidity, and the doctor would have shed his coat had he not thought it an impropriety. As they contemplated the lazily lapping waves, the dog watch went down, and the first watch came on, saluting their fellows as they passed with mild humor. "Wasn't mither right?" said one cheerily. "Sail the farm and go to sea." "They'll sleep tonight," Wallace observed, "and dry for a change." "Was the forecastle flooded?" asked the doctor. Was it indeed? Their beds were awash, and the cook got up the stove, so it was a veritable steam bath, I'm told, and they could hardly find their way about their slops. "They are stalwart fellows," Doyle opined. Again, Wallace fixed upon his medical officer a stern look. Then he turned away and positioned himself at the rail, gazing out over the water as it streamed away behind them. Dr. Doyle, unflustered, joined him there. "I say, what's that?" said the captain, pointing to the air off the starboard bow. The doctor followed the line indicated by the captain's raised arm. "I don't see anything," he said. "Don't you?" Wallace replied. "Look again." Obediently, the doctor surveyed the sea. It was dark, and the heavy mist confused him, but he thought he did see something, a triangle of brighter white than the mist. He saw it, then it was gone. Then he saw it again. "What is it?" he asked. "It's a ship," Wallace replied. "Is it? Is it coming our way?" The captain had his binoculars out, and for several moments he stood at the rail peering through the glasses. The doctor could only try to see, unassisted, what his commander saw, but he made nothing out, if he ever had. A feeling of helplessness and lethargy, it was really so much warmer than one might expect an open deck could be, came upon him, and he coughed, trying to clear his head. The evening cocktail ritual might prove a mistake. "No," Wallace spoke at last, "no. She's gone on. She's on an odd course." He pulled the glasses down and grinned at his companion. "She must be the ghost of the Mary Celeste." Doyle recognized the name, as who would not? He was a boy at school when he read about it. It must be 10 years, he thought, since that ship was hauled into Gibraltar for a salvage hearing that quickly became international front-page news. A ghost ship she'd been, but was she still? The doctor felt the fine hairs at the nape of his neck stir infinitesimally. "The Mary Celeste," he repeated. "She was picked up in these waters, and it was this time of year." "And you think the ship itself is a ghost?" The captain grinned again, shaking his head slowly from side to side. "No, Doyle, I don't, man. But you're such an impressionable lad, I thought I'd try it on you." The doctor was unabashed. "I haven't thought of that story in years," he said. "I recall it was a great mystery at the time. Was it pirates took the crew? I can't remember." "There haven't been pirates in these waters in 50 years, said Wallace. "And there were no signs of violence and nothing taken." "Yes," Doyle agreed, "that's right." The ship was in good condition, but not a soul on board. Wallace nodded, his brow thoughtfully knit. "I knew the captain a little," he said. "A Yankee gentleman, upright family man, name of Biggs, or Tibbs, something like that. I happened to be in port with him at Marseille. It must be 20 years now. He was a young man then, and a handsome one. He had his wife along. She was much relieved to find English speakers. She had no French. And they'd been loading a week. Very dark-eyed, pert creature, confident in that American way, always slyly mocking anything foreign. I invited them on board for dinner, and we had a pleasant enough time. He was teetotal, but he didn't fuss if others took spirits. I liked him for that. There was nothing puritanical about him. He was a cordial man. I remember one thing especially about that night. We got to singing around the table, more polite songs than usual, because the lady was present, and his wife took a turn. She had a lovely voice, almost a professional voice, and she sang a song I didn't know, an American song, I presume. I'd never heard it before or since, but I recall the refrain. It was, "All things love thee, all things love thee, so do I." Wallace tilted his head to one side as if listening to the remembered voice, while the doctor studied him with a questioning eye. She stood up to sing. And when she got to that refrain, she turned to her husband, and he, with a smile of the purest satisfaction, looked back at her. They looked into each other's eyes, you see, while she told him she loved him, and it was as if there were no other people in the world but those two. The look on her face. I've never thought to bring my missus along on a voyage, but I think if she ever looked at me like that for one moment in my life, well, I might consider it. I can tell you there was not a man there that didn't feel envious of Captain Tibbs at that moment. We were all going off to our bunks with a last tot of brandy for a bedmate, and he was going back to his cabin with a woman who adored him. Here Wallace paused, having concluded his story. "And the wife and child were aboard when they abandoned ship?" "Yes. They were never seen again." "Wasn't there something odd about the cargo? Do you know?" "Well, that's an interesting detail. The captain kept a dry ship. There was not a drop of spirits allowed above deck, but he had loaded 1,000 barrels of alcohol at New York. That fool Proctor at the Admiralty hearing tried to make something of that. He was convinced the crew had gotten at the barrels and killed the officers and the family in a drunken fury. Then they put down the yawl and sailed away." Doyle considered this scenario. One of them would have had to be able to navigate, he suggested. "It's possible, I suppose. It would be if the alcohol was brandy, but it was distilling spirits. If you could make yourself swallow it, it would kill you." Doyle frowned at this thought. "So it wasn't mutiny, and it wasn't pirates." "No. I mean, yes. It was neither of those." "Do you have a theory?" "I do not. It appeared that she was abandoned in a hurry. That, I believe, is a fact. But she had too much sail set to tie up to her with a painter, as the salvagers claimed must have happened. Any sailor would have more sense than to try that. 10 people in a yawl on the open sea, tying up to a ship rigged to run dead downwind. It would be suicide. So in your view, leaving the ship as they did was an irrational act." Wallace expelled a huff of exasperation. "You may say so, sir." Doyle pressed his fingertips over his lips, disarranging his mustache. His eyes scanned the horizon, which was dimly visible now as the mist had cleared and the moon was half full. Then there must have been foul play. Or they were mightily frightened of something. Out of their senses with fear, yes. But if the captain was, as you say, a steady man of some experience, that's what has always puzzled me about the incident. I can't think the man I met in Marseille would abandon a seaworthy ship in a panic. The doctor smoothed his mustache ruminatively, and the captain moved his head from side to side, pondering the unsolved mystery. Perhaps, concluded the doctor, they didn't leave all at once. I'm going to read another little short bit. That pretty much explicates the mystery. There should be a disclaimer in this book. It should say, mystery not solved, okay? It's not going to solve the mystery. You might have some more ideas about it. I certainly have some, but it isn't entirely solved. However, if you're a Sherlock Holmes fan, I have solved the famous case of the giant rat of Sumatra. So there is a solution offered to a fascinating Holmesian dilemma, for those of you who remember that tale. But I want to read this a little bit. It's just a little bit about the sea. I started reading this after that ship disappeared into the the plane disappeared into the Indian Ocean. I just was thinking about the ocean, and I thought, I actually have something to say about that. And this also takes place on the ship Mayumba. Conan Doyle got malaria and he almost died, and when he recovered, he discovered that one of the other sailors on the ship, a fellow named Wentworth, had died, and they'd gone down, they'd become ill at the same time, and Wentworth had been, of course, buried at sea. And Doyle was thinking about his fate. Wentworth's illness had run the same course as the doctor's, but he hadn't strength to withstand the fever. Presumably his heart gave out under the assault of the microbe. Doyle leaned over the rail, feeling queasy, but it passed. The sea before him was deceptively calm, and the morning sun, already brutal, smeared it with a gelatinous glow. Wentworth was down there wrapped in his canvas shroud, carried ever downward by the weight attached to his feet, plucked at, nosed about, shaken, devoured by creatures of that other world, Wentworth, the Joker, and thousands like him. How many thousands? The sailors referred to the end of time as the day when the sea gives up its dead. It was a cliche, but Doyle vexed his brain to imagine that day. It might, after all, be tomorrow. Would the waters withdraw and the souls of the dead rise up through the wreckage of the ships littering the ocean floor? Or would the dead be disgorged onto the coast of every land mass, clinging to rocks, floundering in the shallows, pushing forward in waves like the sea itself, waves of the dead with their pale flesh and hollow eyes? It was absurd. The sea would not give up her dead. To be committed to the sea as Wentworth had been, as he might himself have been, he had seen that in Captain Wallace's eyes, was to be lost forever in an immensity beyond comprehension. If every living soul on earth were dropped into the deep, would it even raise the levels of the ocean? Would a great tidal wave be engendered that would sweep across the sea and flatten everything, including islands and coastal cities that stood in its path? And even if that did happen, it would make no difference. The oceans of the world could absorb mankind entire, and still the tides would roll in and out, the sun would rise and set, the moon wax and wane, pulling the waves to the shore. He could not look at it, this vast and temperamental creature that was the sea. And he would not, as he had once thought he might, spend some formative part of his life upon it. It was too lonely and cruel. It didn't pay well, and it made men melancholy, fatalistic, and mad. And that was his last trip as a doctor. He did sail again, of course, but never in a professional capacity. He traveled the world. So this book has 3 strands, and that's 2, the Mary Celeste and Conan Doyle. The third I came to by reading a lot about Conan Doyle, and some of you may know this, some not. Conan Doyle was a committed spiritualist. He became interested in it as a young man, and as a scientist was eager to be a debunker of people who were talking to the dead, having seances. You know, it started in upstate New York, the whole spiritualist craze, and it started with 2 sisters who heard tapping. And they started to ask if they asked the tapper to go through the alphabet, and it was a very painstaking way to get a message, but they did get a message from somebody who was buried in the basement. So that it took off. It became very popular. Young women were very active in the spiritualist movement, and they stood up and spoke in public, which during that period was a little bit unusual. So it was a way to speak, but of course you had to speak through the dead, right? Because nobody really wanted to hear what young women had to say, but they were quite interested in what the dead might be able to tell us. So it became quite a craze, and rich men all over the world, and it was everywhere, all over Britain. The Tsar of Russia invited a spiritualist. Abraham Lincoln went to a seance. The James brothers, those rational brothers, Henry and William James, had a favorite clairvoyant. Her name was Leonora Piper, who they talked to for years. They took her to England to have her investigated. William James went to his grave believing that she was the real thing, what he called the White Crow, who proved that it was possible. I read recently a notion that science was responsible for this outbreak of a kind of hysterical new religion. America was spawning religions during this period as if there were not enough religions to go around. And this was one. But the notion was that the telegraph allowed people to start thinking about the whole notion of if you could tap in New York and get the message in London, why couldn't you go a little farther and get the message from the other side of the grave, right? So that's how the tapping seemed to be feasible. Later on, tapping was so inconvenient that the spirits got tired of it and started just talking through people, right? So, or else they gave dictation. So there were many spirit writers, people who would sit in a trance and just write. Arthur Conan Doyle's wife was one of these. She became a medium, which was pretty shocking because she didn't like spiritualism when they first met, but he converted her to it. It was extremely popular. The other invention, too, was photography. Because spirit photographs were very popular. You'd go to the photographer, and it was believed that the camera could see things that we can't see. Also that the camera could never tell a lie. But what you know is that because it took so long to take a photograph, if I sat here and I have to not move so that the picture's going to come back, a person could walk behind me very quietly, and it would leave an impression as if a ghost had walked by. A person could even stand behind me in ghostly. So Conan Doyle carried around a photograph of himself with his dead son, Kingsley, all the last part of his life. He truly believed in all of this. He was totally dedicated to it. And how this creator of the great detective, who was a doctor and a scientist of sorts, could have been taken in by some of the greatest charlatans, people who were just laughed off the stages of the world. He took them seriously. He lost most of his friends. But he was always quite pleased with himself and convinced that he was going to be responsible for this new religion that would change the world and make everything better. One of the places where spiritualism was quite a popular craze was Lake Pleasant, Massachusetts, not far from here. And there was a summer camp there. Methodists have always enjoyed the summer camp, and spiritualists decided to get in on that. They actually kind of stole Lake Pleasant from the Methodists. They just would book their summer meetings right after the Methodists, and gradually they drove them away. And so this would be as many as 10,000 people gathering on this little lake over the course of a summer. They had a big hotel, they had a train stop, they had a lake with a little steamer in it, they had a dance place, they had marching bands, they had orchestras, they had seances, you could get a little magnetic healing, you could get your spirit photograph. It was really a popular spot. And it became part of my book. And I'm going to read you a section that takes place at Lake Pleasant. It's a totally different voice, and it's a totally different world from the one of Arthur Conan Doyle. Though, in fact, this character you're about to meet for the first time through Phoebe Grant, who is a female lady journalist, is a young psychic named Violet Petra. And what I can tell you without giving away too much is that Violet Petra is on a direct course to Arthur Conan Doyle. So there is a connection that will be made in Philadelphia, and no one can prove that it couldn't have happened. So this is called A Message Under the Door. Phoebe Grant is a young journalist, not too young, and she has been sent to Lake Pleasant to write a story, and she has it in mind that what she wants to do is discredit these spiritualists and prove that they're frauds. So the first night she's there, she goes out to dinner at a big tent. She sees a lovely young woman who's in the company of a very handsome older man, and she doesn't know who she is, but everybody else seems to know who she is. And when she gets back to her hotel room, she finds a message under the door. And this is the title of this little section, which I will read you. A Message Under the Door. I'll read this and then one little tiny piece after it. Dear Miss Grant, as we are neighbors, I'm across the hall in 204. I think you might not mind if I took the liberty of inviting you to join me for hot chocolate and some excellent donuts in my sitting room tomorrow morning. I generally rise at 7 and the restaurant sends up the breakfast at 8. Please forgive the drama of a note beneath the door, but I didn't want to disturb you by knocking, yet I'm eager to make your acquaintance and to welcome you to our blessed, scratched out, idyllic community. The weather promises fair, and the room opens to a charming balcony, and the donuts really are delicious. Can I tempt you? Yours truly, Violet Petra. This is the text of the remarkable document that appeared with only a whisper on the bare wooden floor inside my door. I was standing in my chemise at the washstand, patting my neck and shoulders with the hand towel, and I was momentarily startled by the manifestation of the envelope. My first thought was that it must be a message from the management. I listened for the sound of departing footsteps, but there was nothing save the rustle of the curtains and the evening breeze carrying the muted voices of a few late-night guests returning from the lake. I hung up my towel and, crossing the room, took up the envelope. The note was written on hotel stationery in an open, leftward slanting script. I read it over twice, noting the word blessed had been struck out and replaced by the word idyllic, a telling revision, though what it told I couldn't say. Taking the curious page to the writing table, I seated myself and read it over a third time. I thought it playful and daring, yet studied and designed to disarm. The careful dissembling of the author's true intentions in the formulas of acquaintance-making and welcome, the puerile enthusiasm for sweets, the consciousness of possessing an element of drama and urgency in the manner of delivery, the final titillating, seductive wink. "Can I tempt you?" said the serpent, proffering the donut, and the schoolgirlish closing all fascinated me. No expectation of a negative reply was alluded to, no precise time was set, though presumably I had best arrive in time for the donuts. Chocolate and donuts, I thought, a child's breakfast. I wondered if the gentleman of the night before would be in attendance, and I wondered who was paying for the suite with the charming balcony, and why the powerful clairvoyant, so seriously in demand, was eager to make my acquaintance. What did she know about me? At 8:15, I presented myself at the door of room 204. Before I could raise my hand, the door flew open, and Violet Petra, dressed in a filmy white muslin gown heavily embroidered with tiny violets and embellished by a gold satin sash at the waist and a froth of old lace at the sleeves, her masses of dark hair loose and curling over her shoulders, her full lips rouged and parted, her clear gray eyes fixing tightly on my face, greeted me with a breathless affirmation of her own psychic powers. "I knew you would come," she declared. "How did you know?" I asked. She ignored my question, her eyes flickering over my plain blouse and drindle skirt as she stepped back into the room, inviting me to follow with a wave of her hand. Near the open doors to the balcony, a round table with a good linen cloth was laid for two. Between the plates, an ornate china pot crouched above a plate of donuts covered by a screen cage. On a side table, next to a beige silk upholstered chaise longue, I noticed a copy of Godey's and the Daily Camp News Bulletin. The Boston paper, much rummaged, was scattered across the carpet, so our clairvoyant kept up with fashions and current events. Violet pulled a chair from the table and bid me take it. "We have much to talk about, I think," she said. I let her stand a moment as I appraised her offer with a purposely mystified eye. I wasn't willing to play the game of instant intimacy, which she evidently had in mind. As she apprehended my reluctance, for she was an adept at reading the subtlest changes of mood in her audience, her brows drew together thoughtfully. "You must think me very forward," she said. I advanced to the chair, maintaining my puzzled air as she took her seat across from me. "I admit," I said, "I wonder how you came to know my name." She fussed over the pot, which had a candle beneath it to keep the contents warm, and poured the fragrant beverage into the cups. "Oh," she said lightly, as if my naivete was amusing, "everyone knows your name, or everyone who's read the register, and many do. We're a close community here, you'll find, and you're a newcomer. There's a great curiosity about you." "I see," I said, lifting the cup and sipping the chocolate while she served us each a donut. She smiled at me so candidly that I set the cup back in its saucer. I decided to drop my defensive manner. "It's very good," I said, nodding at the chocolate. "It is," she agreed. "I never drink it at home, but when we're here, I want it every morning." I remarked the plural pronoun, presumably not the royal. Are you here with your family? She lowered her eyes to the plate and said with just the right vibration of regret, I have no family. They've all passed away, some years ago now. Then the gentleman you were dining with last night was not your relative. Mr. Babin is my sponsor, which means he arranges things for me, introductions, appointments, that sort of thing. Sometimes I have speaking engagements, but only for small invited groups. He sees to all that. He's your manager. Her spine stiffened. She fixed me in an icy glare. I'm not an actress, Miss Grant. Her hauteur made me smile. She looked down, picked at her skirt, failing to entirely suppress an answering smile, flickering at the corners of her mouth. Really, she said, you are a most exasperating person. Then she helped herself to an unladylike big bite of her donut. I haven't had chocolate since I was a girl, I said. She managed to smile through her zesty chewing, then swallowed hard. Of course, she said, you drink coffee and lots of it. Why do you say so? Don't all journalists drink lots of coffee? What makes you think I'm a journalist? I don't think you are a journalist. I know you are. Really? I felt rattled to have been unmasked so early in my investigations. And how do you know that? She dropped the uneaten fragment of her donut onto the plate and patted her lips with a napkin, her eyes mischievous, almost gleeful at my discomfiture. Carefully, she opened the square of cloth and laid it across her skirt, lowering her eyes to her preoccupied hands. Oh, I know things, she said. Haven't you heard? What, people's professions? Is that clairvoyance? As she lifted her cup, her eyes still lowered, the martial strains of a band striking up near the lake jauntified the quiet atmosphere of the room. But when Violet looked up again, her expression was mirthless, even sullen. No, she said, it didn't require clairvoyance to know who you are. I read the Philadelphia papers and have a good memory for names. I see, I said, which was true. I did see quite a long way, but not quite far enough, as it turned out. I saw only what she wanted me to see, that she was a very pretty, frank, ambitious little woman. Nothing she said or did would be of any importance to me personally. She would not, she could not make a difference to me, yet I believed there was more to her than met the eye. Above all, I believed she was a charlatan, and as such, no matter how much she might admire me, no matter that she might actually feel affection for me, someday she would be driven to deceive me, and then to despise me for having failed her, for having been deceived by her. I determined to interest myself in her because I wanted to expose her. To do that, I would have to catch her off her guard. And what I most clearly observed at this first interview was that her guard was very high, remote, and impressively fortified. She was innately cautious, perversely non-committal. She presented what she knew was presentable, what was not. She kept to herself. I also observed that she wasn't suspicious of me. Her desire to know me was entirely a product of self-interest. She thought I might be in a position to advance what she would have called her cause. Her defensive mood had veered abruptly back to gaiety. Are you disappointed, she teased? Is it just too ordinary of me to take note of a byline? Not ordinary at all, in my experience, I replied. Most people don't notice the names of journalists unless they happen to be famous, which I decidedly am not. Not yet, she agreed, but you might be. I thought your articles about that murder trial in Uniontown were first rate. I sipped my chocolate, raising my eyebrows over the rim of my cup, stupidly flattered and knowing I was stupid, but unable to help myself. I was particularly proud of the series she named. Violet leaned back in her chair, pressing her fingertips to her lips, her eyes searching my face intently with an unwavering solicitude that unnerved me. You drew those characters so clearly, she said. You must see all manner of cruelty and violence in your work. What was she imagining? That I followed murderers down dark alleys? That I frequented squalid tenements? Not really, I said. I tend to see the consequences of cruelty and violence. Those articles were so well written. It was like reading a story. Thank you, I said, taking up a donut. In the hopes of closing the subject of my profession, I asked, do you live in Philadelphia when you're not here? When I'm in Philadelphia, I stay with Mr. and Mrs. Babin, she said. And where's your home? I don't, strictly speaking, have a home, she said mysteriously. Outside, the band, audibly on the move in the direction of the hotel, broke into the refrain of Oh, My Darling Clementine. Violet smiled, gazing at the balcony. You are lost and gone forever, she sang in a clear, high voice. I like that song. Turning back to me, she said, do you? I nodded. The marchers had paused beneath our window. The music was so loud I didn't attempt to speak over it. The voices of two men standing on a wide side balcony broke out raucously, "In a cavern, in a canyon," while Violet and I sat smiling blandly at each other. I finished the donut, a heavy, sweet, chewy wad covered in fine sugar, which cascaded over my dark skirt. I dusted the powder away with my napkin while the band played on. At last, with applause above and shouts below, the marchers turned away, taking Clementine back to the lake where they had found her. "They do that every morning," Violet informed me. "Surely not the same song." "No," she said. "They have a repertoire." "How entertaining." She leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her chin in her palms, studying me closely as if trying to determine what sort of animal I was. "Have you come among us as a skeptic or as a seeker?" she asked. "Neither," I assured. "I try to maintain a professional objectivity at all times. Though I can't deny, I'm curious about what goes on here." She nodded, pursing her lips thoughtfully. Then her eyes brightened and she stretched her hand towards me, tapping her fingers conspiratorially on my arm. "Are you on assignment?" I laughed at her eagerness. "I'll be doing a short piece about the attractions of Lake Pleasant," I said. "The charm of the setting, the comforts of the hotel, that sort of thing." This wasn't entirely a lie. I had a longer piece in mind, but my editor's charge had simply been, "See what's going on over there." And he was giving me only 4 days of room and board in which to carry out that quest. Violet was downcast. "It's not just a resort, you know," she said. "I know that," I replied. "But what I find odd is how much it does feel like a resort. Everyone seems so determined to have a good time." "Why shouldn't we enjoy ourselves?" she replied. "The spirits of our loved ones are among us." "Yes," I said, "of course." "Of course what?" she asked gently, as if she suspected that my mind had wandered. "The spirits," I said, wagging my fingers at the air where presumably they hovered. "Which you don't believe in." "No," I said, "I don't." "Have you never had an experience of," she paused, searching for the word that wouldn't offend me, "communication," she paused again, "with someone you know is not," another pause. "Alive," I concluded for her. "No, I must say, I have not." She closed her eyes, touching 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. It was the briefest of gestures and appeared to be entirely involuntary, so much so that I congratulated myself for having noticed it. In the next moment, she rested her chin back on her hand. As her eyes, calm and solicitous, recommenced searching my face, she asked, "Not even on that night, in that cold, dark little room, when your mother died?" And then just one little paragraph, the next paragraph, from Phoebe, on ghost. When asked, most people will tell you they don't believe in ghosts. I know this. I've asked. I also know that with a little pressing, it emerges that everyone has a ghost story. In an otherwise ordinary life of toil and struggle, there intruded in this house, in that room, on that night, something extraordinary, inexplicable, something not of this world. One heard something, footsteps on a stair, a child crying, whispering voices in the hall. Another saw something, a curtain rustling in a closed room, the impress of a head upon a pillow, a locked window standing open, a shadow stretching across a floor and up a wall. There was an oppressive atmosphere of sadness or malevolence, sometimes associated with a crime or tragedy that one sensed upon entering the scene. Even the most thoroughgoing materialist had some little anecdotal evidence, some moment of doubting all, now easily recalled and eagerly dismissed. Ghost, great Caesars, Hamlet's father, Christmas past. Thank you.
I have a question or two, perhaps. Any questions for Valerie?
You spoke about how you solved this mystery in part. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, I don't want to give it away.
That's the end of the book. Josh.
I don't want to give it away, and I think I really won't be giving it away to say what I came to think. There are so many different suggestions, and there's a video on YouTube I think you can see, which puts forth a pretty good case having to do with possible vapors from the alcohol frightening the crew. But even and none of the explanation satisfies me, because I don't think that Benjamin Briggs, knowing what I came to know about him, would have left a ship in that condition. They didn't lash the wheel, they didn't take down enough sail, they didn't take things with them that they would have needed. They just threw the boat over the side, evidently. It was a hasty and not seaman-worthy evacuation of that ship. So I came to conclude that the captain wasn't aboard the ship at some point, and that when they left. I got that clue from Conan Doyle's notion in his story. I mean, it had always been sort of suggested that everybody left at once, but his little idea was that maybe they didn't all leave at once. And that got me thinking. So that is kind of where I went. And I won't tell you what happens, but I will tell you that the first scene of this book is the scene of the death of Maria on a ship that is not the Mary Celeste. And then there's the diaries of Sarah Briggs, who was on the Mary Celeste at the beginning. And the last chapter is her diary as well, on the ship. Mike?
I may have missed this in the preface, but have you spent a lot of your own life, on ships and, sailing, or is this something as a writer that you came to be seduced by this story, and then, through research and things, were able to tell the story?
Yes, as I said, my father was a sea captain, but he didn't go in sailing ships, and I've never been to sea. I didn't come on the ferry because I knew that I would die. So I thought it was going to be just an hour, but when I saw it was 90 minutes, I said, I won't make that trip. It's too much terror. I don't know whether sails go up or down, can't tell one end from the other, know nothing about the stars, so I had to start in total ignorance. I had help at my college, Mount Holyoke. There's a professor there who takes students out on these great, huge sailing ships. It's so dangerous. And in fact, they lost a student a couple of years ago, was washed overboard in a storm. But there they go, gotta do the historical voyage thing. Go out there in the water, get lots of people on board a very frail thing and take it out into the ocean. It's just a nightmare to me. So he was willing to read my chapters and correct them. And the first chapter, which really does have a whole lot of kind of ship language in it, and because it's a crashing of two ships together, I had to visualize it. I did go on some ships. There's a big one docked in New York City, so I had some idea of what the interior was like. And I read a lot of diaries of sailors during this period, and even of women who had been on ships during this period. So I got a good idea of, at least psychologically, what was going on. But he went over my pages. He was very kind. I sent him, I think it was almost 40 pages, and he was getting ready to go to France, and he sat down and wrote me 4 single-space pages of everything I had wrong. And I almost gave up right there, because I thought, I'm just not going to be able to do this. I can't remember it all. But happily, I took him at his word, and I continued to study, and I wrote the book. And when I finished it, and he came to the signing, he said, I have read it, and there is not a single nautical error. So that was a big relief. But it was huge that the research about sailing during that period was big and fascinating. It's so fascinating. Conrad's book, The Mirror of the Sea, is really recommended reading. I mean, he's just so nutty, and he's so observant, and he has such a wonderful style that was a great discovery for me to read that one.
Well, I want to close this session by saying that last night, Andre Dubus said that the one thing writers have to be to practice their craft well is curiosity. And I think if you can transcend the fears that Valerie has transcended to write the story she has, which is truly gripping, that proves what Andre said. So thank you so much, Valerie.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
My pleasure.